I don't want to say very much tonight. This is not my event to talk about, but I do want to frame it a little bit. And it seems to me that one of the things that America hasn't done particularly well in a general sense is really mark our holidays, right? I mean, I think that for the most part, when there's a holiday, it's just a day off for most people. And the notion of really investing some time in focusing on what that holiday is has, I think, fallen on the wayside. And maybe that's my own jaundiced opinion. But the point of national holidays certainly is that they bind us, that they unite us, that they teach us something that we share in common. Whether that's Memorial Day, Veterans Day,
Okay.
whatever it is. Um, and I'll confess, I don't think I'd heard of Juneteenth before about 5 years ago. And I probably have read about one or two articles each year about it. But I think that this is probably the first year where a very large number of Americans have realized this is something we should pay attention to, that the past impacts the future, and that we mark holidays to learn, to develop
It's this one up here.
culture and a shared set of meanings, and to really establish who we are as a nation. So I hope that this is not just this year, but the Juneteenth itself figures more prominently in America as part of the way that we as a country come together and realize the imperfect past, and also have it as a guide for who we want to be, where we want to get to, and that the act of remembering and remembering together can help us in that process. So, with that said, I am going to spotlight our presenters, Cleo and Kayin, who I think for most of us are not strangers, but regular beloved parts of the community. With the cutest, I can't say the cutest kids because we have lots of cute kids, but some of the cutest kids in the community, though they keep getting bigger, which makes all of us a little bit smidgen less cute. But I'm looking one day when we all can be together again and actually have our youth running around and spreading their joy and infectious energy. So, with that said, thank you everyone for being here, and Shabbat Shalom. Happy Juneteenth.
Shabbat Shalom. So we're going to start off with going over and showing a couple videos, and then a short presentation, and then talk about some family traditions and customs, and then questions and answers.
I am going to share our screen.
Let me just jump in. If you can't see the full screen, you can go to view options on the top of your screen, and it'll say fit to window, and then you'll see the entire presentation in case some of you are not seeing everything.
Okay. So just some background on Juneteenth. So really kind of framing it, on January 1st, 1863, that was when President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. A full 2.5 years later, on June 19th, is when Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, giving his general orders and formally really kind of informing the last group of folks that had moved away from the Civil War, that were really trying to make sure that enslaved people did not get the information that they were free. But that's when the Union soldiers came in to Galveston and notified them that it had been, in fact, that there was in fact an emancipation. And so we have a couple of videos, and I will share the first.
Day is not July 4th. It's June 19th, or Juneteenth, the day the last enslaved people in the U.S. were told they were free. This year's will be feted with a little more urgency, after George Floyd's death reignited Black Americans' fight for equality. President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. But 2.5 long years passed between enslaved Texans being declared free to them being told about it. News traveled pretty slowly in the 19th century, and even slower for slave owners trying to avoid it. During the Civil War, they fled west, taking thousands of enslaved people far from where Union forces could liberate them. But on June 19th, 1865, General Gordon Granger stood on the balcony of a home made with slave labor to read an order that gave an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. But absolute equality has been eluding Black Americans ever since. Although Juneteenth celebrations would pop up outside of Texas, a century of fighting to survive lynching, segregation, and Jim Crow laws tempered the anniversary's national momentum. After Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination in 1968, his Poor People's Campaign settled on June 19th for its Solidarity Day rally, which symbolically connected the fight against poverty to enslaved ancestors. Since then, states have slowly come around to officially recognizing the holiday. Texas fittingly was the first in 1980, marking a day that late state representative Al Edwards said triggered a series of events that defines the challenges and responsibilities of successive generations. New Hampshire became the latest state last year. But this is still the country that killed Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and George Floyd. A country whose president called Americans protesting the injustice thugs. The distance from true equality may be what kept Black Americans from celebrating Juneteenth. But today, the journey toward closing that gap is exactly what makes it meaningful. This year, it comes as protesters demand that institutions who claim to protect Black Americans don't target them, that the companies who market to Black Americans, including ours, also hire them and pay them fairly, and that the system that's made Black Americans more vulnerable to COVID-19 and the economic crisis is broken. Over 150 years later, Juneteenth is still about how long absolute equality takes to arrive.
Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter.
Okay, so that was the first video, and that one gave a pretty good, just a very quick summary of Juneteenth and really kind of where we are with things. This next video is a bit longer, and it really goes into a little bit more depth of the reason for celebration, and it actually includes some narratives quite often with when people are talking about plantations and slavery. A lot of history books have really kind of said that it was a happy time for everyone. It was a great situation. And one of the things that's obviously starting to come out, but has been known, is that that was not always the case. And so this video actually includes some of the narratives and some recordings of people who were formerly enslaved. And it really kind of gives some first-person context to those issues.
Juneteenth is a deeply emotional moment for enslaved people because for decades, for centuries, enslaved people prayed for, hoped for, fought for in the form of slave rebellions, running away, bought their freedom when they could. And if you read slave narratives, if you listen to spirituals from the era of slavery, you know that enslaved people longed for freedom. This was something that had been hoped for, but many believe may never come.
carry the motor from a store to give me $40 a month in bed. The lots of the boys say they ain't want it. They rather go free, you know.
Being able to go wherever they wanted, being able to wonder about. For enslaved people, it was an expression of their freedom.
Well, that photo was the one that long missed photo, one of our white folks made. He was coming along, we all sitting on the fence, and the colored soldier come along and asked her, did she want to go with him? She said yes, she mounted one of them horses. She went on with them. I never did see her and hear tell of her no more.
When I think about Juneteenth, I think about it in the context of Emancipation Day celebrations that began January 1, 1863. They took on a whole new meaning when slavery was formally abolished after 1865. You would have had African-American veterans who fought in the Civil War be prominent in these celebrations, dressed in their military garb, speeches from enslaved people, the most prominent Black politicians singing of hymns, spirituals, discussions of registering to vote. Enslaved people celebrating in public their newfound freedom was an act of resistance. Because we have to remember, slavery came to an end after a 4 years bloody Civil War. Still the bloodiest conflict in American history. Many people in the South and in the nation who did not want to see slavery abolished fought tooth and nail to block the 13th Amendment. The abolition of slavery created a huge humanitarian crisis in the South. Suddenly 4 million people have very little means to take care of themselves, to support themselves, and do so in a really hostile environment. So the military was necessary to make sure that enslaved people got the food, the medicine, the shelter that they needed in order to survive. They're also there to protect, to the extent that that was possible, freed people from violence, from recriminations, from slaveholders, from Confederates who still hadn't given up the fight.
And I remember, and the Yankees stopped here, and the Yankees stopped right on the corner of the square, and they prosecuting people, you know. We go to the ground team, and they take them hanging over the stone. That's the punishment they got. Next time you see, they come a whole troop of Yankees, all riding horses. Guns hanging on. I said, Mama, where are they going? They're all going home now.
When the last federal troops leave the South, it's a signal to Southerners. The federal government wasn't going to put its might into ensuring the civil rights of Black people would be observed. You have 20, 30 years later, Black people being lynched in public, and there isn't a federal anti-lynching law to protect them. In most communities in America, there's a history of lynching and racial violence, and very few communities have marked that, commemorated that. Every decade since the end of slavery, Black people have been more educated, accrued more wealth, more status in American society. Every decade since 1865. But there's been one constant, and that constant is the presence of random racist violence. I see in George Floyd's murder was a white police officer attempting to dominate and to subdue a black man who was not resisting, who could not resist. Even though slavery came to an end in 1865, the desire to master and dominate black bodies did not. And we have never dealt with that. These are the kinds of stark realities that are highlighted during Juneteenth. If black people's lives can be expunged through racist violence and no one is held accountable, how free are we? Are we free?
Okay, so again, those were the kind of the origins and the context in which Juneteenth started and is still currently celebrated. There are celebrations all over the country. The largest ones do tend to be down in Texas. There are huge celebrations down in Houston and Galveston. My family actually comes from Galveston. One side of my family actually comes from Galveston, Texas. So there are some good things there that I've learned. But Cleo's going to talk about some of his family customs as far as some of the things that he grew up with.
Yeah, so growing up, I learned the folk history of Juneteenth. It's less academic, and it goes more like around between 1865 and 1868, when slavery was abolished, that it didn't get out to majority of the United States. And it was between 2.5 to 3 years later where majority of those who were held in bondage were free, but didn't know that they were free. And once the realization of emancipation came into play, a lot of us didn't know the real date. So we called it sometime in Juneteenth. So the tradition that I learned is from the 13th of June all the way to the 19th. So the teens is everything that you celebrated. So it just depends on your family customs, origins, and whatever the sort of like minhag of that particular group in society looks at. So, but we recognized it from the 13th, from the 13th to the 19th, and also some of, so you would of course eat, read Bible verses from the Torah, verses from Deuteronomy and Exodus, go over, anything from Harriet Tubman to Booker T. Washington to Frederick Douglass. You would eat foods that were the color red. A lot of strawberry soda is popular. The red signifying the strife and oppression and blood that was shed. My grandfather would slaughter a sheep or a goat a lot of the times on Juneteenth, and we would barbecue. We also, and then overall tradition would be a lot of fried fish. So that was, you know, if you go to any city, folks are you know, celebrating Juneteenth with fried fish. And the interesting thing about fried fish to me is that depending on your location, you'd fry different types of fish. And when my family moved to the Pacific Northwest, which really unique in the Black community, is fried salmon. If you've never had fried salmon, you need to try some fried salmon. It's just off the hook. What else? So Juneteenth what it reminds me of. It would be kind of like a culmination of Pesach, Purim, and Rosh Hashanah. So you kind of do all of these. It's a combination of that to where you're looking at emancipation, what it means to be free, but you're also questioning the freedoms. You're pushing forward for independence. So you may be so-called legally free, but the question is how independent. What are these? There's still been a lot of the Jim Crow laws have still been in place. So yeah, we can take questions and answers.
Do you want to end the screen share right now then, just so
Okay.
we can get you bigger? I just want to say, you know, so clear, you know, I'm sure we'll start getting questions in. It's nice to see so many. We've got 56 screens. I know some people 2, 3, 4 people, so a lot of people have come, and I'm grateful for the communal interest. You talked about those. I liked how you sort of mashed those holidays together. A little bit of Carnival with the Purim part in there, but in Passover, right, the tradition and the Torah itself has a Daled Lashonot Shel Chirut, 4 languages of freedom, and there's actually a 5th that sort of like the 5th cup of Elijah on the Passover table, and it's talking about this progression towards freedom. It recognizes that it's not like you suddenly get out of Egypt and you're free. It recognizes that freedom itself is a process. In some ways, probably a never-ending process for all people, but certainly for anyone whose bodies were enslaved, getting minds free, getting spirits free, getting the people surrounding you free of the chains they continue to hold you in. All of that stuff is definitely a process. So with that, just as a first story, where do you see that phase of freedom? This long 400 years, right? 1619 project, right? This 400-year project that we've been in. How would you imagine where we are in this path towards a true freedom or complete freedom, or however you want to define it?
You want to say something?
I definitely think there's some progress being made. And I think the idea of the situation currently being that there's freedom, but not really free, not really free to move about, not really free to engage in all kinds of different activities, whether it be, just being able to take a jog in the neighborhood or sit on your front porch, take a drive, get a new job, move, any of these things, that there's people that feel that you shouldn't be able to do these things. So there's improvement. There can be a lot more. And I think it's really just a matter of growth at this point, and continual growth that needs to happen, and some real paradigm shifts.
Actually, that's a difficult question for me to answer, because looking at this, I mean, I agree with Kayin. looking at this, there's a piece of freedom, which can be granted, and then there's a question of liberation, right? Which no one can liberate you. So there's that balance of liberation and freedom. So you need to liberate. You need to be liberated first. You need to liberate yourself first, whether you're granted freedom or not. So where are we at today? To me, in an idealistic perspective, we're like at square one. That's just idealistically. But in reality, really looking at the process, maybe we're starting to get somewhere when it comes to liberation. Maybe, maybe I'm not sure. It's a tough one because I'm looking at it kind of more than on the surface. So I'm juggling those things of liberation being out in the forefront, and then your legal freedoms, because there's things that as a family and as a community here in Northeast Portland that we're still battling with just property rights alone.
Yeah.
So I don't really know where we are, but it feels like this moment in time with the coronavirus and this resurgence of a revolutionary thought process and action, that now the world is listening, not just the United States, but the whole world.
No.
Folks couldn't. It's funny because everything was stopped, right?
No.
There's no sports. There's nothing to watch. There's nothing to do. There's not. You can't change the channel.
Right.
And it's like Hashem just said, "Look, we're gonna deal with this right here, right now." So, first we start off with coronavirus, and African Americans and other essential workers are the most in harm's way and dying from coronavirus. People aren't making money. The market is crashing. People are getting bored, and then all of a sudden, the police put their neck on a brother's neck. Put their knee on a brother's neck, suffocate him. 8 minutes and 46 seconds?
48 seconds, whatever, yeah, something.
Yeah. What else are you gonna do? No one's making money. No, there's no distractions.
No.
So, it's almost like this was divine intervention, and the strength of a people to protest, and other people came in.
No.
Other than the Black community all around the world, to say enough is enough. So I don't know, I'm still assessing like where we're at. It feels like day one, but it's not, because it's a process. So I do agree with what Kayin is saying. So I can't really answer that. That's just all I have to offer.
It's fair enough. I don't think any of us, I think history is written long after, when you have time to reflect, right? It's like trying to do art in the midst of it versus once you have a better sense of it. I'm glad you said that, by the way, and share with the community, because I know I shared with you my own earlier in this process, in this, in the aftermath of George Floyd. I had a lot of my own pessimism, because I've seen so many of these moments arise and protests gather and peter out. And you basically, you told me just what you share with the community, and it changed me. I definitely feel a lot more encouraged. Right. Partly where we are depends on where we go, right? I mean, this moment only will, we don't know what it means because we as a nation, as a people, as different groups within this nation are going to determine what this moment means, right? And that's not written yet.
Yeah, but there's a spiritual component involved in it.
I
So, I
know, yeah.
mean, like,
God is here, I think.
I mean, yeah, you got to look at the direction that it really, this holiday today, as well as what's going on, is really reminiscent of Pesach to me, which is actually one of my favorite holidays. So, so I mean,
We celebrated together once.
we play a part in this. We have to play our part, but we have to be able to read and understand the divine intervention involved in this. Like, this is amazing. Everything put on hold, stopped. Say stop, pay attention.
It's
I want to see what's going on with the people that I created, with my creations, with the people that have been treated wrong for the last 400 years on this planet. That's huge. And now the world is paying attention.
it's I don't think I really understood Jeremiah when God makes the sun stand still, sort of until now, because everything is standing still, and that's kind of remarkable. It is kind of remarkable. So we got a couple comments here. A lot of people were interested. I don't know that you have any more information just on, we had a conversation in the chat just about whether or not it's a national holiday. It seems like all but 4 states. I don't know if you guys are up for that.
Yeah,
And
just
then,
I was checking on that. So a lot of states are starting to recognize it.
mhm,
Right now, it's pretty independent. I know Multnomah County is recognizing it as a paid holiday. It really kind of depends on your
mhm,
place of employment. Like, for instance, US Bank is recognizing it as a holiday, but it's a half
mhm.
paid day off. Other places, it's a full paid day off. City, it's a full paid day off. So that's kind of what it's looking like here in Oregon. Other states, I think, are doing some different things, but yes, they are pushing to make it a federal holiday.
So the Anik Oslins have the last comment in there. I don't know if you can see that. I guess they're
Yes.
wondering about.
Mm-hmm. So
Like,
asking about Kamau Bell, so for anybody who's not seeing that, it says, Kamau Bell was posting yesterday that Juneteenth is important, but what really matters is defeating white supremacy, dismantling structural and institutional racism, better schools, good jobs, and access to health care. Yes. All of these things matter. And I think as we defeat white supremacy, it's not only, so white supremacy is not just thinking that as a white person you are superior. It's also can look like, oh, well, I did such a great job helping these poor people. And it's really kind of taking that moment to humble yourself and really kind of look at the other narratives that are around you and realize that those are just as important, and not to really kind of center yourself in everything. That's one of the issues that I'm seeing a lot of. Um, I have a lot of friends who do diversity and inclusion and equity work, and they're kind of overwhelmed because they're having so many people ask so many questions at this point in time. And some of those questions are simple as a Google search. And so it's that, again, relying on people to do work for you that is unpaid work when it's something that you could very easily do yourself.
So I want to jump on that and respond to what Sharon Siegel said about what we can do now, because we are rolling out like a full year of focus on 400 years, right? And there's different parts of it, right? One is this sort of event, but part of what I'm hoping we'll be doing as a community is educating ourselves, right? Because exactly what you said, right? That's our responsibility, right?
Mhm.
Encountering implicit bias, looking at ourselves, that's something different. And we're going to be working, and you, Cleo, certainly introduced me to Donna Maxey Race Talks a while ago, but where she and I are working to come up with, full year stuff. We're going to have faith leaders come in throughout the year, but there's stuff that we have to do for ourselves also, right? That there is that liberation isn't, a liberation is a task that everyone is called to, right? And I'm thinking, right, and Cleo, when you and I were having a conversation, and but it's 400 years, right? And we were, your Jewish identity you also carry, right? We were in Egypt for 430 years or so, and God help us if that's the time frame it actually takes for this sort of thing to happen. Uh, is that a modality? Is that a model? I don't know. But there's at this point, I mean, while that sounds way too longer than I would like to think that has to take, at least we've done 400 years now, right? I mean, maybe it means that really there is. That's, I mean, I know you right. One of the things you keep challenging me on, right, and that's worth saying here too, is what is the spiritual message in here, what is the spiritual capacity, because there's a lot of work that people are doing throughout society, a lot more work to be done, a lot of work that we're doing, but the stuff that we can offer, right, that doesn't really happen in the larger society very effectively, is that changing of hearts and minds and spiritual unfolding. And so that's one of the things I think that we're called to do. I know Sharon wants really concrete things, and we're working on creating a booklet with a bunch of stuff. But again, Sharon, based on what Kayin said, right? There's a Google search, right? You could go Google search right now 75 things white people can do, right? And you'll pull up a full list of stuff. So there's things we're going to do communally, but also this has to be about each of us wanting a different outcome and doing what we can do. It has to be about what I would call self-differentiation, right? It can't be about just leadership. It has to be about everyone sort of finding their way to engage, is sort of how I view it, at least.
Mhm.
And Yaakov Epstein has just included another sort of we're getting some nice suggestions for resources, folks, right? A
Mhm.
14-part series, the book White Fragility, and Toby saying concrete policy action investment, right? And another book also, how to be human beings to Black people for dummies. I'm always a little bit mixed on those books because the title itself isn't particularly menschlichkeit, but I mean, so Toby, 100%, and right, and that's the voting, and that's letter writing, and that's calling, and also there are limits. And I'm going to say it. It's not popular, but there are limits to what a congregation can do. That's not our. I don't think that's where we have the longest lever to move the earth the most, right? I think that that's important work, and that there is a role for houses of worship to do for that. I don't know if that's where we have our longest lever. So
Mhm.
yes, Toby says I meant as individuals and families. Yes, and right, call our politicians. Oh,
Yes.
uh-oh, I've been signed out. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just got a message. I've been signed out from another device. I don't know what. We're still here. So, folks, I'm talking way too much. We got some other questions, folks. So I think people are sharing their favorite books, which is fantastic. It means that people are engaged and doing their learning and reading.
Yeah.
We are recording the session, and so we should be able to capture all of that, and we are slowly gathering stuff. So, by the way, if I can ask people who have made suggestions, if you could just send an email to me and Brian Rohr, because we do want to sort of, I mean, we have some of these things ourselves, but we do want to assemble it, and if we can crowdsource a lot of those resources, that says something about who we are at Neveh Shalom also. So that's a power in your voice is contributing to reading materials, learning materials for our community?
I would like to respond. I would like to say something I'm seeing in here, and this is just me. I mean, this is just Cleo, I guess. I do see some comments that say it's like it's not our job to educate white folks on this, that, and the other.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, though,
Mm-hmm.
I've been, dealing with white America for a long time. And for them to educate them, I know there's a piece of self-education, but some of the things that white people think are correct, it's not always correct. So I don't mind just kind of asking like what's up to be told. So it's kind of weird. I've been our we come from a art and design background and platform, as well as community activism and multiple other areas. I went to an architectural uh, um, forum last year in the issue of global warming, and at some point it just dawned on me, because majority of the people there were white, and they were coming up with all these ways that were actually more exacerbating the problem of global warming, design and global warming.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, at that point is when I had a conversation with the keynote speaker to say, well, the very people that you're leaving out of the conversation and that is being exploited. And this woman was really cool. She's from South Africa, and she was a white Afrikaner from South Africa that worked with the native people, seen herself as a native, and all these great things. But the thing is like you would get more answers from the indigenous people of that land or the indigenous people around this planet versus architects and designers.
Hmm.
And there's some things in this country that white people created, problems that white people created, that is for others to solve. And there's some things that some other problems that white people created that only white people can solve. One of them is racism. So personally, me, I don't believe in white supremacy. I don't recognize it. I don't use that term. So I don't really know what white supremacy is. Anyone who was supreme over the land. If you were supreme over the land, then that means Hashem made you supreme. And if you were supreme, you would be a steward of all of the land. So I don't really use that term, because what people describe as white supremacy to me is exploitation, hate, anger, and destruction, and insecurity. So feel free to, ask questions. A lot of times folks in the Black community, or a lot of us, feel exploited without being compensated. Everyone gets compensated for questions and answers and lectures, things of that nature. But lately, Black folks have been expected to volunteer their time. So I think that's one of the main issues going around the community, is that, we've been stripped of land, property rights, just rights as a human being. And then we come in and we volunteer our time. So those are things to just be mindful of.
I know when I was speaking with Donna, she first initially wanted to do it for free, and I was like, "We're not doing this for free, right?" And so then we started negotiating, which is good, right? That's how business is done. That's how work is being done. And look, she did that work for 10 years without, as a volunteer. It's about time that people start remunerating her good faith efforts to build the town, the city we wanted to see. So I know it's Friday night, and I know some people probably haven't had dinner, and I also know that there's some people who have questions. So Amanda Middleton wanted to know about how white people ought to relate to Juneteenth without it falling into cultural appropriation.
Um, yeah, I think it's safe to say Happy Juneteenth. I think that's right now that's the safest bet. I don't know what that looks like in the future. I think as it becomes more recognized as a national holiday, it's really just again remembering what the holiday is about, right? So we end up with all kinds of things going on. So in relationship to say Martin Luther King Day, where it's become for many people, it was a day off. People weren't really doing anything, weren't recognizing what it was about, why it was made into a holiday. Now there's been a big campaign nationally making it a day on, a day of service, a day of working towards for the community, working together, building bridges, that kind of a thing. And so I would say with regards to Juneteenth is really understanding the history of it, understanding where it's coming from, the state of the union as it is, and where things need to go. And so in that practice and whatever celebration, I would say to really kind of self-assess what your activities are, and if it is really kind of centering yourself or Black history, or really kind of fighting for more freedoms.
But also the unique thing here, like for this community, I mean, if we just look in the halacha, I mean, it's a little different. So in a lot of the Jewish communities, it's not the same as white racism. So I mean, we have halacha, for the Ashkenazi Jewish community, in my experience, it's not the same. We have halacha to lean on, but the only issue, really, not the only, but one of the big issues in Judaism is the ethnocentrism, which is it has a tinge of racism. So, I mean, for the community at Neveh Shalom, you're already a step above of, if you consider yourself white, of the majority of white folks. So just looking at Torah and
You have the AC on.
Somebody's mic is on.
I thought
Yeah.
someone
So look, I mean, I think one of the advantages that Neveh Shalom has, right, is that it has a strong contingent of both Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jews, and right, Jews are the first I don't know the first, but certainly one of the earliest multinational, international globalists. I can't even use that word now, right? It's a bad word, but a people, right? And
Right.
we are, you go to Israel and it really is a melting pot, and you see people of so many different backgrounds, and that was not the case in a lot, and still is not the case in a lot of the American Jewish communities. So we are, just by dint of where people sort of resettled when they came here, we have the advantage already of knowing we're not one thing, and that itself is, punctures maybe that illusion that people can have. But I also think we have work to do. I mean, yes, I don't view Jews as white, but Jews in America at this point, certainly not always in America, get certain of the advantages of being white, and some Jews emphasize that benefit, which makes sense for anyone to emphasize their benefits, but emphasize their whiteness, maybe over their Jewishness to some degree. And so I don't, look, I think a friend of mine was writing, and I said, look, we're all breathing the same air. Racism, it's in our molecules. We've been breathing this stuff for centuries, right? So it's not like, our difference in background, the fact that we have a long history of oppression because of our religion, our background, our unique ways, right? That's not like a free calling card, but it does put us in a different position. I think that's right. Anyone else? We got some other questions here. I know Yaakov Epstein's talking a little bit more about what he learned from watching a couple of those sessions on that the podcast that he's watching, Seeing White. Talking about race as a construct. Absolutely, race is a construct. So much of human knowledge is a construct. This is a particularly noxious construct. So Toby views anti-Semitism as a cornerstone of white nationalism. So yeah, it's interesting. In pretty much everywhere in the world, right, the Jews have been the canary in the coal mine of the moral and spiritual development or state of that society. And in America, blacks get to occupy that place, right? I think Jews did also, right? But the unique conditions of slavery and body slavery, chattel slavery, are so different that in America, to be a Black American is to be a Jew in so many other places of the world. But the condition of the most despised groups tells you where the society stands, right? So
you also have anti-Blackness
Mhm.
all around the globe. So I mean, I don't know how many people was keeping tabs on what was going on in China and Africa. Even in Europe, you have Nigerians and Algerians being discriminated against. It really breaks down to, from my understanding, the cultures and countries that were colonized by that specific European group. So like in France, they have the largest problems with, they highly discriminate against folks who are in France who were part of their colonies or former colonies, whereas they don't treat so much African Americans so bad. But you still have this whole notion all around the planet of anti-Blackness and the exploitation of Africa and its resources, from its human resources and natural resources from the earth. So it's all around the planet, even in Asia. What they were kicking out Black folks during the COVID and discriminating. So
I read some.
And then that's when a lot of African countries said, well, then we're not going to work with you on our resources. So this whole thing is changing the whole world. I mean, Brazil, people, that's where the largest amount of people who were taken from Africa and enslaved were brought to Brazil. That's the largest population of Africans who have been enslaved on this planet. But we were taken to the four corners, all over, from Asia to all the continents. It was a huge endeavor. So
yeah, I mean, I think the poverty in the Caribbean, right, is indicative of these larger forces, right? I mean, that's a whole section of the world, right, which is suffering. And apart from like when a hurricane comes, right, it's invisible to us, certainly.
Right, especially in a place like Haiti, which was the first independent country in the Western Hemisphere,
Yeah.
and it was a revolt, slave revolt against France,
Yeah.
and to this day they are still paying France for
They
their
put an embargo.
freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom.
Yeah.
So all the wealth is still going to France. Jamaica is still sending stuff to Britain, Great Britain. So it really is, when we look at how the wealth is, where the wealth goes, and whether it's retained or sent out of the country,
Yeah.
then that's is a whole different game.
And that thing is ancient because that America was built on the cod and the salt cod trade, right? The cod fisheries in New England, there were so many fish, you literally could walk across them. That's what a lot of the writers wrote. And a lot of the early American founding fathers made their money because you didn't need any capital investment because it was so easy to pull these fish out. And salt cod was more expensive because salt refining wasn't like it was today. So there was just air dried cod, which was a lower quality, and the salt dried, which was of higher quality. And in order to avoid taxes, um, stuff was sent to Jamaica, the cheaper, lower quality fish. That became part of the congee, the food that would feed the black slaves who were handling the sugar plantations to make rum to ship to France. And there was this triangle to avoid taxes in each of the country, and it was all based on the back of the black person.
Yep.
So there's a million stories like that, and that's that show up. So I know we sort of were racist capitalism.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's we got work to do, and somebody mentioned, right? I mean, I guess that was Rivi or Eric, posting. Um, I started off with this comment that holidays are only useful when they are shared expressions of our values, right? I mean, we're fortunate as Jews because we have a lot of holidays that we actually are committed to and that we're committed to learning about, and where we have content that shapes our values, which shape who we are. And that we got Jewish holidays that almost no one follows, right? Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, right? Nobody, what, I mean, they're these minor half fast days nobody even knows and nobody engages in. And so to me, I mean, I guess, Juneteenth, right? More important is ABC. The answer is yes to that, but that ideally what happens, I guess, in the symbolic realm is that it's an expression of who we are and what we care about, and that it propels us to live those values. If it just becomes an occasion for another day off or another or a celebration, right? I mean, I like that, a day on rather than day off for MLK Jr., right? I mean, then yeah, then it's not going to do anything, and the larger things are there. But that's up to us, right? All of us have a role in there. So I want to leave the last sort of comment or wrap up to you guys before we sort of let people get back with their Shabbat. But I'll just, on behalf of the community of which you're part, I just want to thank you very much for the presentation. You, of course, I didn't know what you were going to do, but I knew that with the artists, right, we got the full multimedia and the conversation. So thank you for doing that so quickly.
For sure.
You're welcome.
Thank you yes, you're welcome. And thanks for the invitation. I'm going to drop a link to our website in the chat, just kind of some of the work that we're doing and kind of our current project. And it really kind of goes towards some of the things that we've been talking about as well.
We're not supposed to do business on Shabbos, but Shabbos does candlelighting is not till about 8:46 or something like that. We're talking about having the board and others do a virtual tour, which we can't, of Black Portland, that talks about the really noxious history here. Could we hire you to give us maybe a virtual tour of your artwork in North Portland, the walk that you and I had done, Cleo, once?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about that and make that happen. Everybody, thanks. Most of the people, I guess maybe we lost about 5 or 6 screens, but most of the people stayed on, and I'm very grateful. It says a lot about who we are and who we want to be as a community, and it honors and respects Keen and Cleo. So thank you for being here as well to everyone. Any last words for us?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Kayin, were you putting the link in?
Yes, I just dropped it in.
Oh, awesome. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it's hard for everyone. It's hard to copy and paste from Zoom
it.
chat.
No, it's still not showing up, Kane.
It's there. It's buildingcornerstones.org, right?
Yes.
Oh, it's okay.
It's further up in this. It's up in the
Okay.
chat.
I was
Shalom,
looking
everybody.
for
Thank you, Kayin and
coordinate
Cleo.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And by
Thank
the
you,
way, we've got
Kristen.
Israelis here tonight. Yeah, Elle and Randy were on. I see them. Elle and Randy Schur, who sponsor or part of the family who puts on our Scholar in Residence program each year. So, Randy is of course a Portlander. So thanks for being here. Also, it must be 6 a.m. What is it? 5 a.m. there? 5 a.m. That is hardcore honoring.
Yeah.
Joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
That or insomnia, I don't know. Yeah. Oh man. The middle years, to sleep like a baby again. I don't know. So, all right. Thank you guys. We'll be in touch, and I'll wrap it up for everyone. So, good evening.
All right.
No.